Hey, welcome to Creative Block. We're your hosts, V.
And Sean, aka Lord Spew. We talk shop with other creatives in animation and comics about things like finding your artistic path and the process of making art while we doodle on Magma.
We asked people on our social medias if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. By the way, we're trying to reach 10K followers on YouTube by January. We're so close. If you're not subscribed yet, just hit that subscribe button.
10K, 10K, 10K. Today we have with us Ty Goodwin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. How's it going, guys?
Hello.
Good. So glad to have you on the pod, Ty. I feel like we had talked about this like 2 years ago, and finally it's happening.
I know. I'm very glad to be here. Very exciting. Yeah.
We were just talking about how good of a podcasting voice you have. We're initiating the After Hours Animation Podcast with Ty Goodwin right now.
Welcome to After Hours.
Creative blog.
So we were also talking about how you've had a little bit of a former career before you landed your first union job. Can you kind of tell us a little bit what that looked like?
Yeah. So my first real rodeo with getting paid to draw was actually being a caricature artist at the San Diego Zoo. Initially, I'm from San Diego, just moved up to LA a couple years back, like mid-pandemic. But yeah, coming out of high school, I applied to, the art school circuits. I was particularly set on CalArts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tried there a couple of times. It just wasn't working out. I was just too much in a different space of my life to be thinking about college, really. I wanted to start making money and figuring my life out. So I definitely worked a fair share of odd jobs coming right out of high school. I worked at a postal annex place. I worked at a flight school. I was doing all sorts of strange occupations.
Did you fly?
Chauffeuring.
Were you up in the air?
I got to go up in the air with the students every so often, and there was some crazy side missions where my boss, we flew on one of his planes up to Palm Springs thereabout, where he had this car that he wanted me to drive back down to San Diego.
That's cool. So I mean, you were doing jobs by land, doing jobs by sea, doing jobs by air. What would you say was your first art job? Did you say caricature artist?
Yeah. So after working a bit of odd jobs, I was like, I need to be getting paid to do art in some capacity. And my friend Evan had found out that you could just work at the zoo as a caricature artist. He had met some people there, and he was like, Ty, you got to get on this. This is crazy cool and fun. You get to socialize with people, meet people from all different walks of life, and you just get to draw funny faces, draw animals, entertain people, and have a good time. And so I was like, you know what? That sounds pretty cool. And so that is what I did for quite some time. And I did not, it was weird. I always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder being got to get to animation. It was what I knew that I'd want to do from early on. And, charactering has, even though it's definitely an art form that people can understand, a lot of it is oh, you're just drawing ugly pictures of people. You're just poorly, you're scribbling in whatever capacity you can to make me look ugly. And that never fully sat well with me, because there's such an art form to it. You're figuring out how you can play with forms and really capture, what's the furthest that you can get from reality while still capturing somebody's essence and their personality, the charm of their smile, the glint in their eye, all of these beautiful things that make them a person. Boil that essence down and do that in a drawing in a matter of 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes, while they're just stopping by briefly on their day at the zoo. Mm-hmm. And it's
yeah,
it was a very interesting and challenging period where you got to explore so much, because you just, every new phase is a new opportunity to try something different. There is obviously just like, it was just an endless amount of practice that was extremely crucial to me feeling confident, like committing to forms, committing to how I see the world, and being brave to like try different things, and knowing that like, the person is probably going to expect to be disappointed in some capacity, or they're preparing for the worst, and like that's an opportunity for you to explore. And yeah, there's just like a lot that I got to learn about like how people perceived art by getting to talk to them and work through their misconceptions and understandings of like what it means to be an artist, and what it means to be a good designer, and to be a good, I don't know, to sell people on your ideas and on your craft. And I think that like,
are you talking about having these conversations with the people you're caricaturing, or like was that conversations that you were having later in life with other artists?
I think it's a conversation that, would come up through many of the encounters with these guests at the zoo.
Oh, interesting.
But definitely a conversation that would always happen internally as well. I'm quite an introspective person, so it's like when you get such a wide data set of people and opinions, right, and you're like consistently hearing the same jokes or the same remarks, or it's like, oh, I always thought art was cool, but like I can barely even draw a stick person. It's like, okay,
yeah, it's
that's
true.
that's clearly ingrained in the public perception of what it means to be an artist, and like who's allowed to be an artist, and this perception of talent, and this block between like an average person and somebody who's like, oh, they have the creative gene.
Yeah.
And it definitely left me with a lot to chew on, where I knew that I wasn't having the impact on people that I wanted to have as a caricature artist, just making these funny faces. Because even if I captured them perfectly the way that I felt like I could best possibly draw them, they would just look at it and be like, why'd you give me a big nose or something, or like that, or like, oh, that looks so silly, haha. And it's like, no, like it's such a vulnerable, unique experience, right? To be somebody sitting down and letting you draw them, and you're drawing them not how they look, or not always. I mean, a lot of times I was drawing them how I felt like they wanted to be seen, so that they would feel happier buying the product. But like sometimes when you see just a really neat face, because I've just focused on way too many faces over my lifetime, and especially through that period, to notice like, oh, like your bone structure, or the way that your eyes are proportioned or slanted, or your eyebrows or something, like you really get to discern what's fascinating and unique about individuals. And I feel like I got some really great opportunities to like make those observations, and then make those statements in my art, and then like watch them not land, or like on the days where you're just like, it's hot, it's 100 degrees out, I cannot draw well, I'm just trying to get through the day, and you're like scribbling something, and it's the child's like favorite thing that they've ever seen.
Oh, that's actually so sweet. What the heck?
So what did your drawing style look like at that point? And was this kind of your first foray into adapting to a style that wasn't yours, in the way that you do when you go on to a different show and you have to adapt to a style? Because there's like a caricature style, or did you kind of lean into your own personal style and even use that to like experiment with character design in your own style a little bit?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So the company Commons definitely has like the Commons way of drawing a caricature. And it was like developed by Brian Oakes. He's like just a phenomenal caricature artist. And there was like definitely a period of time working there at the zoo where it's like, oh yeah, like chasing this golden ideal. And then also just like for the sake of you're having a bunch of artists under one common company brand, you want them to when people are like, oh, do you want to get a caricature, you have to like look at the examples that are posted around the character stand. They should be walking away with something that looks like somewhat in that ballpark, So there was definitely a period of like, oh, can I master this specific kind of like caricaturing form? But especially because I knew that I didn't want to stay a caricature artist forever. And I also like grew to understand that discernment of like, oh, like the level of creative literacy of like people actually understanding like designs that I like versus what floats their boat is such a a wide range. It was like, okay, no, I'm going to use this time in this space to just grow confident, explore, figure out what I can within this space, and just like use it as an opportunity to to just learn, I guess, in many multiple directions.
That's really cool. So you had to, I never knew that you had to learn a specific style to do caricatures. I just somehow just thought that like all caricatures were, I don't know.
They're all drawing on model instinctively. They all like
I
it's
don't
like
know. I
all
thought it was
species
just like
evolved to crab automatically.
somehow it's
like
just that style.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never really thought about it. I never really thought that
That's
was
fun.
like, okay, that's the style that's agreed upon. You know what I mean? I just thought like, oh, that's just how these artists like to draw.
So that was your first union.
Sort, right? Sort of.
Is that a union? I don't know. Is it a club?
No,
What is it
considered?
It's
I mean, it's like a company. We didn't have I don't think there was hardly anybody aside from like our managers or like some of the very long time veterans that had like full 40-hour weeks and like qualified for benefits through the company itself. But yeah, I think more or less than like, yeah, because there's no like guidebook to how to approach each person's individual face.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely like introduced me to the idea of stamps, where it was like there was like a commons guidebook where you could look to and refer to like 50 different eyes or 50 different noses or mouth shapes and stuff like that were like considered within the realm that you should just be like building off of. Mm-hmm. And so for times where it's like, oh, like I've nailed, for the days where it's just like you have a line behind you and you need to blow through drawings and just try to make as many sales as possible. It's like, okay, I'm going to focus on capturing this person's, like, they have a really distinct hairstyle or a really distinct smile, but their eyes or their nose or something are more generic. I already have like, 5 shapes top of mind that I could just pull from them, and I'm going to choose the one that I feel like suits them best. And that's like, honestly, a tool that served me well moving forward. I think that like stamps can be detrimental when you're trapped by the options at your disposal and you feel like you can only do so many things. But I think that there's like sometimes where it's like, whether it's a personal art piece or a professional design, there's always going to be like a focal point, right? There's always going to be something that needs to deliver that message or fit that function. And there's other parts of the design that just honestly aren't as important. They're not meant to be labored over or made super unique, because that's not always what that design needs. And so to just have that confidence or that backlog in your brain of like, oh, I can just use placeholders that will help support the design and push the eye towards where it needs to be looking. And when everything is unique and crazy and zany, like nothing is. So learning how to like have that balance of like, okay, there's these basic structures that I'm familiar with and comfortable with, and I can just build off of them into unique directions when I need to, I think was crucial then and has stayed crucial throughout my creative journey since.
Now, is this like spilling the secrets of the magicians, where they'll get pissed if they find out that you're talking about the stamps and the 50 types of noses that you can learn? Like, are the caricature artists going to come for you if they listen to this?
Maybe. But I think
it's like they hang up wanted posters that are all like caricatures of your face.
Someone's listening to the pod and right away is just like, listen, we gotta go after the man who delivered the secrets. I was wondering, did you use any of these drawings for a portfolio?
No.
Yeah.
No. Because yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's, I think of the thousands and thousands. Well, it's hard to say how many character drawings I've honestly done over the course of like 3 or 4 years of working, but it's well into the thousands. But of those, I think that there's probably like 20 good characters that I feel like I've really
Oh no.
that I'm personally proud of. You
I
know,
see. Yeah, yeah.
I think I was just, in terms of feeling like I satisfied the client and also got to do things my way with the shapes that I wanted and feel like I made a good sale. Those experiences, quite few, honestly.
Quite.
Yeah.
Okay, I do think there's something that's really interesting about you describing that general interaction of you being the caricature artist. You're trying to make a sale, but you're also trying to keep your client happy, but you're also trying to keep yourself creatively fulfilled, which sounds very similar to working in animation or like trying to sell a show where you're trying to sell your show. You're trying to make
Yeah.
something that you like, but you're also trying to keep the client happy. In your experience, well, first I just kind of want to keep it like a tiny bit chronological. So after you wrapped up on that job, did you aim for an animation job right away, or did you have to like kind of jump through another couple of hoops before?
Yeah, there was definitely more hoops. I think amidst still working at the zoo, I think I started going to animation conventions. Like, I think it had to have been in like 2016 that I went to my first CTN expo, and there I oh geez, what was that like? That was quite an event. I think leading up to it, I was in a bit of a what's the best way to describe this? Because basically, around that time, I had made my first art book. I think I was like 20, 21 maybe, and I was like, man, I've like been on this planet drawn for almost 20 years. I've been working as a caricature artist and not feeling like I'm very fulfilled or like it's fully representing who I am as an artist. And I haven't had an opportunity to work on a project that has allowed me to do that either. So I need to like, take it into my own hands to be like, I'm going to make something that I'm really proud of. And I think that's where like the first seed of me kind of going down this incessant self-publishing route kind of began. But I wanted to roll up at CTN and have this publication of mine so that when I went up and talked to like all of my art idols, I could be like, even though I'm not working in the industry, this is like how serious I take myself. And I was just prepared to like hand books out to people. So yeah, I think I gave one to like Shun Kim and like Jake Parker and just all, these people that had really informed my art journey up to that point. But I remember having this conversation with Adam Dix specifically, who you had Adam on here like not too long ago.
Yeah, check out episode 174. Let's see. I
was about to say you were so quick on the draw with that. How did you Google that so fast? You memorized it?
No, I'm gonna check. Wait, videos. No,
185.
185. I lied.
Dang,
I lied.
so
everybody.
close, so close though.
185. Adam Dix. Great episode. So you showed him your work.
Yeah, and we had a pretty real conversation. Honestly, I was super appreciative to him because he was like, "Yeah, Ty, like you're." I mean, it's hard to remember the exact words, so I don't want to put anything exactly in his mouth. But he was impressed enough, and he was like, you got these very unique shapes, these very ambitious ideas, and you're obviously taking yourself very seriously. And I can see that you like have this drive and this intent to like chase down whatever your creative dreams are going to be. But if I'm being honest and very realistic with you, if you want to break into this industry, this is what the timeline is going to look like. If you want to get in as soon as possible, go pursue props, go pursue storyboards.
Mm-hmm.
There are more jobs for those. You can apply yourself to those more quickly if you just want to get in. But I know that you want to do character design.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do character design, it's going to take 4 more years, 5 more years. And you just have to be aware of that. Do with that information what you may, but that's how I'm perceiving things. And so I was like, okay. And I had to have a conversation with myself coming out of it, right? Like, I've always wanted to be a character designer, but 5 years felt like a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, dude. He's so real for that, though. It's cool to be able to get that kind of like actual real feedback, you know? Like, it can be hard sometimes to go to these like conventions and like get an artist to be real with you, you know? So
yeah, totally.
That's really cool.
Because they don't want to be mean. They don't want to crush your dreams. You know, that's not what they want to do. That's not what they're there for. But it sounded like he really wanted to help you.
Totally.
And so what did that activate in you? Like where did you take it from there? I mean, was that a launching off point in some sort of way? Did that change your mind about anything?
You know, it was reaffirming, honestly, that I really wanted to do character design, honestly, because I went and tried to do some props, and it wasn't sticking for some reason. And I had like this other kind of, outside of the zoo, I would do a bit of freelance doing storyboarding, actually, with like these film grad students at SDSU. I like had a friend whose older brother was like in like the film graduate program, and he had like he had gotten real smart, because I guess when they're like developing their films, they'll have these like check-ins with their professors where they have to have like all of their shots boarded out, and like obviously they're filmmakers and not necessarily artists first and foremost, so they would just be like coming through with stick figures and the most, you know, crude rudimentary markings that could sell their shots. But he was like, you know what, I want to be, you know, as professional as possible. I know that I'm a director and I know that I'm not an artist. I'm going to go hire a board artist and, you know, get to show off to my professor that I actually have like some nice boards to present my film as. And so once he hit me up to do boards for his films, then all of his classmates started getting like, oh shit, we're going to look really bad if we don't do something about this too. So I kind of had this like black market grip on some of the film students there, where they like were paying me out to board some of their films so that they could get better marks in class. And obviously through that lens, like when you're just boarding for college students, like it's you don't have to be held to as tight of conventions, and the rules are a bit looser. And I could just already tell that like even with that level of freedom, without having to abide to like the rules that I would need to abide to be like a storyboard artist in animation specifically, I was like, I don't think this seems very intense and exhaustive and demanding, and my brain doesn't fully work in this way that was seeming easy and appealing to me at the time. So I was like, you know what?
It's funny that you bring that up, because I do remember way back in the day when I was on Newgrounds, and I would be in like in a little circle of like animators. I've done some of my friends' storyboards, and they finished the animation. And I feel exactly what you just said. I felt at the time where it was just like so intensive and so creatively draining to do these things, even though you have like no like specific asks, like you're free to do anything. Like you don't have any constraints.
Sure.
But I still ended up doing storyboards, so I don't know. It wasn't enough to discourage me.
Sure.
I mean, storyboards are just really time consuming. It's hard, and on top of that, like you're trying to, especially when you first start doing storyboards, you're trying to kind of like compromise with yourself. Like, okay, what's the roughest that I can leave this and still be proud of this?
Mhm.
Especially coming from the point of view of like you're a designer, and I'm sure that you like doing finished drawings. Like suddenly you have to go into storyboards where you're like, okay, the finished thing is the sketch. And I think that that's very hard for some people to like you're trying to find your shorthand that's your in between amount of work and finish that you're okay with.
Mhm.
Totally, totally. And I think what I was realizing too is like at the time I could understand that boarding, well, I think for all of art, I take it quite personally and quite, I feel like there's a level of vulnerability and like honesty that you need to fuel your craft.
Mhm.
And I think that it's like, at that time, it was a lot easier for me to be like, okay, this is how I see the world visually. This is how I see shapes. This is how, when I look at a person, and when I'm imagining, you know, them as a character, like this is how I perceive them, and I could feel a lot more confident about putting that down on paper. But when it came to like, you know, thinking about gags for boards, or thinking about stories, or thinking about like condensed snippets of my, you know, actual storytelling that I wanted to explore, I think it was like a lot harder for me to be like, oh, these are stories that I want to stand behind, because I just didn't feel like I had seen enough of the world, or seen enough into myself, I guess, that I was like, oh yes, these are specifically the stories that I want to tell, and this is the type of tone that I want my work to have narratively. I think I didn't have a clear grasp on that yet, and that was too daunting to figure out at the time, when it was just like, okay, I know how I perceive people as shapes, and like design wise, I know that I can be pretty honest and transparent with that in a meaningful way.
How long did it take you for you to get to a point where you felt like you did have that? Or do you still are you still not sure?
I mean, I'm just getting there now, like in this past year. Like I mean,
That's real.
made some started making comics for the first time seriously this year,
Mhm.
and it's still something that I'm figuring out, right?
Yeah.
Because with the comics that I have done, they're about dogs, and I feel like in terms of the subject matter of dogs, it's like you can say whatever you want about a dog for the most part.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't say that they're bad or ugly or a bad boy or no, just
But if you, theoretically, if you did, the dog is never going to read the comic book in order to understand or know, you know, the
But
way that you feel.
Ty, have you ever looked at the comment section of any pet video on Instagram? You can
That's,
always do something wrong.
listen,
Sometimes I
that's,
think my dog is smarter than I am.
You don't understand. You cannot feed the dog treats just day after day, just like that. It's just going to make them sick. You're abusing the poor animal.
Yeah, you have to chew up the treat with your mouth and then mama bird it into the dog's mouth, and that's the only way to protect their teeth.
We're going insane here, but no, we know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
feel
because
the
when
most
I
sane
was
I've
when I
ever
was
felt.
making my comic for Fetch, I was like, dang, I kind of have these unresolved feelings about my dog
Oh,
and
wow.
pet ownership, and I have all of these like heavy feelings that I want to express, and I found a way to express them in like a very like silly and cheeky way, but I still don't really feel like I'm like at that stage in order to like, you know, make broader strokes about like how I feel about my life, how I feel about society right now, how I feel
Yeah.
about, you know, some people,
Well,
some
taking
people.
it, just starting
Yeah.
out with your dog and branching out to the rest of the world is okay. That's a good place to start.
Totally, totally.
I like that you bring that up though. I think it's very, what's the word, like conscientious, I guess. Like you're very conscious of the kind of content you're putting out, and in the terms of stories, and like the depth of the stories you want to tell, and you're really thinking in depth about it. I think that's very admirable, because sometimes, you know, like we can all make like dumb comics and just post whatever, but like I like that you're thinking about like the depth of like society or whatever, and I'm like, hell yeah, you're gonna come out with like a banger comic
Yeah,
very soon.
I've realized I have no quaint, simple thoughts about about much. It's
But,
if it's not
you found
tie,
your
if it's
entry
not
point.
heavy.
I think that's a good piece of advice for people that are looking
Yeah.
to start off telling a story, though, is if everything feels impossibly serious or big, try to find the least serious thing or the thing that feels the least like big and scary to start, and use that as an entry point to like get your foot in.
Totally.
Because now you're in storytelling. Like you've
Yeah.
made it. Like you could, your next comic could be about the world blowing up or whatever.
Yeah.
And it all starts with a dog. Yeah.
It just escalates drastically between the two Fetch issues. But let's talk about Fetch a little bit. So you came up with the idea of Fetch well after you like worked a union animation job, so you kind of like realized your dream at that point, which was to get a union job in animation, or maybe that wasn't your dream, but at least it was a goal, right?
Totally.
And what kind of made you want to put together this anthology? How did you kind of like come up with the idea?
Yeah, I guess to do a little bit of time skip over the industry stuff, which might be more fun narratively.
Yeah, we're tracking you as your storytelling. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do it.
Yeah, so I had rolled off of Craig. What was that? Like halfway through last year now, right? It was like July 2023, and I didn't quite know what to do. I had achieved like the fullest extent of what my dreams were up to that point, because I had been an artist for so long, had been freelancing and supporting my own self outside of the union for so long as an artist, and then I was a union artist working at one of my childhood dream studios, but then that era came and passed so quickly, so fast, and I was like, what am I gonna do now? Because I could tell
that sigh.
Clam, amplify that sigh that Ty did. The Ty sigh. Can we just get that really loud in the recording?
Yeah, it was a rough transition, and not because I felt helpless or hopeless, but it was this thing of like, I had kind of understood at the back of my mind, even prior to working at Cartoon Network, that like working at a studio like that and working on a TV show wasn't going to solve all of the frustrations or unrelenting yearnings that I had in terms of my creative fulfillment, my connections, my feeling of connectivity with other artists, and feeling like I was really putting out the work that I wanted to see in the world. Because so much of working for a studio is just like, you're there as a hired hand and as a designer, and I have the skills to do that so well, and I enjoyed doing it for what it was. But there is the part of me that is a designer, and there's a part of me that is an artist. And I think I've had a bit of a naive belief that I could marry the two seamlessly throughout my whole life, and that once I finally was working at Cartoon Network, that those worlds would finally meet. But obviously once I was on the other end of it, I was like, I need to take it back into my own hands and be like, you know what you want from your life and from your art, Ty. You know what you want from your connectivity with other artists. Go and chase that down and figure out what that looks like, and make it happen on your own terms, so that nobody can take it from you. And so towards the end of last year, I was like trying to get back into having like sketch groups. That's been a big part of my creative journey, is like, who can I get out of the house to like meet up with me at a cafe and like
Yep.
work together and talk and like just
Mhm.
figure out, you know, what's going on with ourselves, what's going on with our art, how do we feel about the industry, what are we doing, you know? And I was just so lucky enough to have this one session where, yeah, just like a couple of really great guys, AJ, one of my best friends, Deshawn, Nick Wynn, Mark G, these guys
Oh,
from the animation
yeah.
industry that are like amazing designers, amazing board artists, amazing directors. But this thing that they have in common is that outside of the industry, they make a ton of comics for themselves. And they just like, they have this beautiful outlet for whatever stories, whatever, you know, imaginations, uh, and all of these internal yearnings, they have this outlet where they just like, you know, get to pour themselves into it in what seemed to be just like a really satisfying and fulfilling way. But I had tried to do comics at an earlier point in my life, and it had not worked well. And kind of piggybacking off of like back when I was dabbling in storyboarding as well, where it's just like this just feels very daunting, and it
Mhm.
just feels like a lot, and I don't know if I can tell a good story. And all of them kind of shared this same belief that it was like comics should be easy, and if
Yes.
they feel hard, you're probably approaching it wrong, and you probably are in the wrong headspace or thinking that comics need to be this one thing when they're not. They can be your thing, and if it's your thing, all you have to do is exist with your thoughts and your feelings and what you want to do in front of the page. It'll just happen. And I was like, I don't know, guys. I don't know.
You guys are crazy. You guys are talking crazy.
But yeah, but it was like it was such a unified insistence that like you should just you need to figure this out. And
You're like you guys are drawing comics that aren't about dogs, and you can actually finish the comic.
Yeah, but it was interesting, right? Because I was at a place personally where I had proven all that I could up to that point. You know, I was getting gigs that I was proud of. Personally, I was making art that I was really proud of. As a designer and a draftsman, I felt very powerful and in control of what I could do. And so I was like, maybe they're right. I have all the tools. It's clearly something that's like in my head. So I kind of sat on that idea for the rest of the year while other projects and work was taking place as I was trying to stay afloat outside of the union again. And what's crazy is that we like arrived earlier this year. I got my notification that I was going to be tabling at Lightbox, and the project that I had been working on up to that point was like this card game, which is like the first Good and Able endeavor. I knew that it wasn't going to be ready to showcase in time for Lightbox, and so it really became this question of like, okay, if not this card game, what can I do? And
Well, I love that as an excuse to get yourself to do something. Like they're like, and you didn't even do this on purpose, but you made there be there's like this deadline that happened of like okay, I have to figure out my personal expression. I have to make a comic or whatever by this deadline. That's so interesting.
Totally, because it's like Lightbox is a rarity, you know. It was after I had tabled like 2 years ago that they had become very clear about like, oh, we really want to avoid like, you know, a grandfather system. We want to make sure we're filtering in as much new talent as possible. It's like, I'm completely on board for that, but what did that mean for me? Maybe I'm not going to table at Lightbox again, you know? And so it was like, if I had this opportunity to table one more time, it needed to be, I needed to do something impressive, but it was also like, all of it came into the fold almost so seamlessly, where honestly the first time that I had tabled at Lightbox, it was because my friend Pablo Rivera, he actually got accepted, and he was like, yo, Ty, do you want to like table with me? I think it'd be really fun to do this together. So I wouldn't have even had the chance to table the first time due to my own merits, right? And so it was like, okay, if I'm going to be tabling again, I finally have started working on personal projects that are collaborative. And when I'm thinking about, okay, doing a comic and what are comics to me, at that point, comics to me, I was looking back and I was like, yo, the best experiences that I have with comics right now are looking back on these times where I've gotten my comic friends to like meet up with me at a cafe and finally draw together and talk and have a good time. And so if I'm going to make a comic project for Lightbox, it needs to be collaborative, and I need to show up like making space for my friends and seeing who I can bring into the fold to showcase at this event.
That's great.
And so I was like, I don't think I can make an impressive comic on my own before Lightbox, but I can sure as hell manage an anthology and see if I can just get, people who are really important to me to be a part of it.
I love that, because that is, dude, your story, it's so crazy how similar it is to my story with Lightbox, because I was like, the first time I ever tabled at Lightbox is because my friend got in, and she was like, my friend Marion, who was on the podcast, episode 99, Marion Bauden. And so she invited me to her table, and I was like, I really got to come up with something. And I got a bunch of my friends together with an anthology, and it was awesome because I was like, okay, I know I can make a 10-page comic, but I can't make a big chunky book. And it was just like the nicest thing ever.
Sure.
So I love that. I love that you did that. And yeah, I feel like tabling really helps find like the motivation, having like that external deadline. You mentioned Good and Able being a project of yours. What is Good and Able to you?
So Good and Able it had initially started out as just like a brand name for myself, I guess. I wanted to explore more like merch production and stuff like that. In the past, I'd had like a Patron where I was like trying to make stickers and shirts and like basically figure out how I could take my work and turn it into physical things that I could share with people. And that experience was like quite insightful. Still have learned like a lot of very handy things from that era. But all of this time I was very much aware that like while I'm fully capable and, enjoy making things on my own, there's something about doing things with others that I just get a fulfillment from that I can't quite get anywhere else, and I truly need it to feel like I belong, or I'm like doing my part as an artist. And so I have a very good friend, Evan, who I mentioned earlier, who like got me into caricaturing. He's actually like a childhood friend of mine, and our journeys have been very parallel through a lot of our lives. But we always have like a project that we've been trying to make. But at a certain point, we had so many like, oh, this is like a cool idea, we should like really do this, and then like getting way too married to the idea and way too precious about it to actually like execute it properly, that we were like, no, we need to like step back and figure out how we can actually make something. And so Good and Able kind of became this, already having this prepared like kind of brand name and identity, and this sentiment of like, it's not about perfection. It's not about making the best thing ever. It's about figuring out how to pull the trigger and just do the thing so that you can get to the other side of it, so that you can share it with somebody, so that you can learn the lessons that you need to learn from it, so that you can inform how to make that next project just like that much better. And so, yeah, we got to a point where we had a very real discussion. It was like, in the midst between, I was like working on it was between working on the movie, the Craig movie, and then our final season. There was like a 2-month hiatus where I already knew that we were canceled, and it was like, I need to figure out what I'm going to be doing after this. And I had a conversation with Evan, and I was like, can we just like talk about like realistically what we could make in the span of 2 months, and like kind of get things going. And so the idea of a card game came to fruition, and that was kind of like where things really got their legs. And I really got to, both of us got to figure out like what a good, healthy, productive, creative dynamic really should look like. And then that's just something that we've carried over into Fetch, and then we'll now, with everything that we've learned from Fetch, we'll be able to inform finishing the card game and then moving on to our next projects that we have in mind.
So tell us a little bit about Fetch. Like, what is it? How did you assemble the people? Just kind of like just pitch us the project a little bit.
So yeah, when I came to the point of like, I want to make an anthology, it was because where we were at with the game and where Evan was at in his life, I just knew that I needed to like take a little bit more ownership in terms of like what this next project was going to be. And I had just learned a lot from his project management and how he was approaching the card game. And I was very excited to get to try that for myself. Because also this card game was like the first time where like me and Evan are both very business minded, but also very passionate creatives as well. And so we would consistently end up butting heads, where we were both trying to make creative decisions and then also trying to have agency in the management domain as well. And the card game was the first time where Evan actually stepped back and he was like, Ty, you're going to art direct this. You're going to make all of the visuals. I'm going to have very minimal input. It's going to be all you. And I'm just going to make sure that in terms of us hitting our deadlines, finding a vendor to make this thing, everything else on that technical side, I'm going to make sure that this thing gets made. You just need to worry about making the art for it. And then together we figured out the game mechanics mutually. And that was huge of him, first of all. And it really created this amazing opportunity for me to design a project that I am so proud of. It's one of my pride and joys, which is crazy because I haven't even gotten to share it with anybody yet. But already seeing this thing of like what can happen when an artist who is very intelligent and very smart when it comes to art takes a step back and is like, no, but I want to see what you can do, and I want to see how we can elevate your vision. I just couldn't wait to try and do that for somebody else, because I felt like that might yield something really cool. And when it came to like, okay, who is that going to be? I just got to this reflective point of like, okay, there's quite a few people in my life where they mean a lot to me in terms of who they are as a person or as an artist. And I'm very close to them, or I've had them in my life for a very long time, or they've, they just have work that I'm, even if they're not fully aware of it, who they are as an artist has like really shaped me as an artist. So I started putting together this official invitation for Fetch, this idea of like, okay, we're going to make an anthology and it's just going to be about dogs, ideally exploring just like how we perceive them and what we find interesting about their antics. And I just sent that out to like 50-ish people.
What do you find interesting about their antics? What started the dog thing for you? Because it sounds like you have a story to tell, and if you want to save that story for when people read your story in Fetch, that's okay. I was just curious about why you chose dogs in particular.
It's like, what's interesting is when the idea first came, it wasn't anything too deep. Yeah. I had already started practicing making some comics, and the ones that had the most traction had dog characters as
Okay.
the focus, and so it was like, okay, it seems like comics about dogs are like coming kind of easy, and it was kind of clicking in my head too, right? Like, okay, if everybody has an opinion about dogs for the most part, whether you've had them or not, whether you like them or whether you don't, they feel like a very accessible topic, and they're very marketable, right? And so all of these flags were going up in my head where it was like, okay, it just seems like an easy yet meaningful theme. I didn't want it to make it like fan art of like some existing IP or anything like that. I wanted it to be something that was original but still universal and interesting. And dogs felt like the play. But then as it came down to like, okay, but what comic am I actually going to put into this, and why do I actually care about dogs? Then I had to start like unpacking. And then that's where like, I don't know, things got a bit heavier. But it started out quite innocent, honestly.
Nice.
That's really cute. I
Yeah.
love that. What did you learn? What were the hardest things about spearheading an anthology like this? And it does look really cool. The way that
Yeah.
you've put the book together, man, it's so awesome. Like you really designed it to a T. Like I don't know, the color selection and just I don't know, even the summary or like the intro pages where it's all like checkered and you have the little characters. It's so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it was interesting. It definitely became way different than what I imagined at the start. And so it was definitely a lesson of how to adapt and adjust on the fly, and how to evolve alongside a project and in the midst of a collaborative agreement of, oh, this is something we're all making together.
What was like the expectations versus reality? What's something that you thought it was going to be like versus like how it turned out?
So, like I said, I had like sent the invitation out to 50 people, and my thinking was like, I don't know. I knew how my own personal life was going. I knew how the personal lives of quite a few other people around me were going, and it's like, as much as everybody loves to like make art, life just doesn't stop happening. You know? And there's always something that's fighting for your attention. And sometimes shit is just too heavy, and even with the best of intentions, just like not, the stars don't align. And so even everybody that I sent the invitation to was like somebody that I cherished and really wanted to be a part of the project. I was going into it with the expectation that like maybe half of the people that I send it to would respond, and then maybe half of those people would actually have the space in their life to be a part of it. And so I really did think it was going to be like maybe 5 to 10 of my close friends, and then I would have to be filling out like, probably contributing like 4 or 5 comics to the work itself in order to just like buff it out a little bit more. But unfortunately / fortunately, what happened was like almost everybody that I reached out to was like, oh hell yeah, like let's go, like right now.
So you
like,
were
let's,
like, this
let's
book
do
is gonna
this.
be big. Oh shit.
Yeah.
So
That's
but
so
I had
funny.
set these very aggressive deadlines with this project. In this invitation, I like laid out what the timeline was going to look like, and it was like from the time of me sending the invitation out, like a proof of concept needed to be submitted to me within like the next week and a half to 2 weeks in order to be considered and like secure a slot. And I was like, okay, so I feel like this is gonna like cull like a lot of people, and it still ended up being like 40 people that met that first deadline.
Oh my god!
You gotta be like, okay, 2 hours from receiving this email, you must like you have to make it like impossible to reach.
There is something to be said though about how artists, especially if you worked in the industry and you have a hard time like setting deadlines for yourself, so when somebody else comes
Sets a
out of the
deadline for you.
blue and
Mhm.
is like, here's a deadline for you if you want to be in this book, all of a sudden you get a lot of artists get really excited because they're like, oh, I don't have to think about it, I just have, it's just like work but fun. And
Yeah.
so that's really funny that you bring that up. It is funny because it is true, like a lot more people would participate in an anthology than you think. That's so funny.
Totally, totally. But yeah, of like the 40 people that met that first deadline, I think our final number of artists for the anthology was like 36 or 37. So like
Woo!
almost everybody made it through
Yeah.
to
No,
the
that's
end.
gnarly. Yeah.
But there was, that is also because for like these other deadlines, there were times where it was like, okay, I I wanted to have the full order of books in my hand prior to October 1st. And
Oh
as
yeah.
V knows, like I'm not gonna have the full shipment of books until tomorrow. Maybe Saturday. And Lightbox, which like Lightbox is the whole reason I wanted to make this project, is like next week. And it just, what happened was that, there were like, these final deadlines that were arriving, and it was like, okay, I know these people that are working on these comics. I've checked in with them. I know that they're like almost done, but like the deadline is here. Am I really going to be like, oh, no, screw you guys just because you couldn't make it on this day, like screw all of the work that you put in thus far, like we're going to ship it without you. And I had to have like that conversation for like 3 days in a row, where like a day would pass and I'd be like, I should really ship the book today, but like one of my favorite artists like isn't finished yet, and I know how much they care about this project, and I know that they're like just trying to get it finished. Am I really ready to like pull the trigger without them? And I had to have that conversation way too many times, and it was with a project like this where I got to bring together so much talent that I'm proud of and passionate about. I just ended up pushing the needle back like one too many times.
Oh.
And so yeah, it became a learning moment of like, what is the metric where I'm going to be like, oh, this book was successful. In a certain world, it probably would have been successful if it was just like, yeah, whoever can show up by the final due date. The most important thing is that these books arrive before October 1st, so that you're not stressed out through October. Because yeah, I've been stressed out through this month
No,
so far.
no.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, that's so crazy.
And it's like, but I had to decide like what that metric was going to be. And this time around, it was like, nah, it's the homies. I'm going to make sure that like everybody can be a part of this. And I'm really proud of how it turned out now, and that I can say like, yeah, me and like 30 something of my favorite people are like a part of this project together.
That's amazing. I love that. It's good to start with something like a comic before doing anything, in my opinion, like that's a little bit bigger, like an animated project. I feel like the printed, I don't know, what have you done any printed projects before? And if this is your first printed project, like what are some of the things that were tricky about it being printed?
I've made like one art book and like 2 zines before. And you're asking, what did I learn about this one specifically?
Yeah. What was different? What were the new challenges, I guess, for this one compared to the others?
I think the new challenge was, of course, just like the magnitude of people involved. Yeah. Because there were certain things where like, yeah, I just realized the limits of my communicative capacity. There are times where it's just like, yeah, you're trying to juggle 10 or so conversations on the day to day and communicate important notes or feedback back and forth between different circles. And I had like done my best to like create Discord and get everybody involved there, but there are like some people that don't use Discord. So then I would like be emailing updates, but then there are some people that don't check their email, some people that only wanted to like text updates. And so my brain was existing on like more than 3 different platforms.
That's
And there was
so real. That is so real. It is like this is just on the side and a tangent, but I feel like the breakdown of platforms right now is so
It's
hard.
exhausting. It's
It
exhausting.
is.
Yeah.
Even just if you want to throw a party now, it's become really hard to know
Right.
how to reach out to people. No, yeah. I just wanted to say that.
Totally. And it's just something that I wasn't super familiar with because I've never really run into that issue before. But yeah, there was definitely like a point where I would have certain conversations with people and be like, oh, I didn't communicate this information with you, or what I thought I had communicated, got communicated to somebody else, or I didn't follow up in time. And it's just like, yeah, 40 people is a lot of people to wrangle. And there was a lot, there were certain things that I didn't know at the start that I could have been more prepared about. Like I had decided the dimensions for the book, but at the time of sending out the invitation to people, I hadn't decided on a printer. And so I didn't necessarily have a specific template for like what their bleed or parameters or anything of that was, because typically for a printer, like you can go to their website and download a template that then you can build your work specifically in mind for. And I basically told people to like start running and start ideating prior to giving them a very official concrete template to use. And I thought that telling people the parameters of like, oh, this is going to be a 6x6 book would be enough, but it definitely wasn't. And I should have known that and definitely acted upon that sooner. But that definitely caused its own set of problems that I am, fully responsible for and will know to adhere to a bit more strongly in the future.
That's great. Yeah, wrangling people management is so tough. It's like it takes so much brain space.
It really does. And it's like that's kind of the frustrating thing about the project too, is I wanted this to be an opportunity for connection, because I was through this process of like thinking who I wanted to be involved. A lot of it was like, man, I really appreciate this artist, and I don't think this artist knows like how important they are to me, and like this invitation is like the first step in me like showing that care. But it also would have been, in a very ideal world, like I wanted to like hop on calls with everybody who was involved and be able to talk through like, where are you at in your creative journey right now? For the most part, a lot of artists, especially animation artists, are stuck between this rock and a hard place of being so under demand for what they need to create for work and even outside of work. What do I need to be creating that's going to keep me aggressive for that next position? What do I need to be doing to update my portfolio? Make a new TV pitch, make a new TV pitch, make a new TV pitch. And a lot of times, if people aren't doing their immediate comfort drawing or fan art or something that's just helping them wind down at the end of the day, they're not having a lot of conversations of like, what's going to feed my creative soul right now? What type of art do I want to be making just for me that's not being designed for some external consumer? And I really wanted Fetch to be an opportunity for people to utilize as a space for that to be whatever they needed it to be in that regard. And I got to have a couple of conversations with people like that, where I got to see where they're at in their creative journey and see how I could, have Fetch be this thing that propels them forward towards what they want. And I just didn't get to have that conversation with enough people. There were some people that said, yes, I'm interested. They submitted their proof of concept. And then I really didn't get to interact with them much until the final submission. And while I'm, just super proud and stoked that people took the time out of their busy days and lives to make art for a project that wasn't entirely their own, my personal fulfillment was hinging on getting to connect with these people a bit more closely. And yeah, I was expecting that I could do that with 40 people is, again, a bit unreasonable.
Well, are you able to have? Are you having like a little release party, or like are you able to get some people together after the fact and sort of like celebrate it coming out and use that as an excuse to talk to them? Because it sounds like you want to talk to them.
Totally, yeah. I'm hoping for that. We had a bit of a release party when I got one of the first test prints, so I could finally show off the physical copy, at least for people who are local to look at. And again, the hope was like, oh, if I had all of the books before October 1st, I could be
Sure.
handing them out to artists prior to Lightbox. And it's like, I don't think anybody's in the headspace to be having a celebration party this weekend. I know that I'm not. And
Sure.
then, you know, shortly after Lightbox is going to be like the election and all of that. And I have no clue what the vibe is going to be after that point in time.
I do think that people need a distraction, though. I think that a distraction is welcome. But I get you.
But yeah, well, I have no clue how I'm even going to be feeling post Lightbox. I don't know what that's going to take out of me, or where my head's going to be at afterwards. But I am still looking forward to, yes, this idea of an official release party for Fetch, where all of the collaborators can get together and get to know each other more. Because again, like for the most part, I'm the unifying thread between all of these artists. Not all of them are like animation artists. And even if they are animation artists, they might not know each other. And so getting to introduce all of the cool people that I know of to all of the other cool people that I know of is still a dream that's waiting to happen for me. So yeah, I am quite excited for the time that we all get to come together and be like, yeah, look at this book that we made. And really get people excited for what they can do next, whether they're going to start collaborating with each other or if they just want to make something for themselves, that hopefully they'll feel empowered to do that now.
That's really cool. We have a lot of questions from listeners, and I want to try to get to as many as we can. We have a lot of questions about character designing, so I think I'm going to lump in a couple of them. So Teben_art on Instagram asks, how do you know when you're done iterating a character design? And in a similar type of vibe, we have on YouTube at Hudson B PD3UD asking, what is your favorite part about character designing? And how do you think of the designs for characters? So kind of like, what's your process around character designing? At DMask66 was asking the last one.
Yeah, it definitely does come back to iteration, even though character design overall is my like passion. Historically, most of the work that I've done has not been, again, not union, and it hasn't been like, you know, doing a ton of turnarounds or a ton of special poses. It's been a lot of viz dev for pitch Bibles or you know, animatics or shows that are in the process of being pitched around but are never really like seeing the light of day. These avenues where there's these creators or these producers that like have the money and they have the idea, but they just don't know what the visual is going to look like yet. And I've been lucky enough to be that guy to be like, well, I can show you. And, you know, just going through that process of taking a form and just continuing to play around with it and see the different directions that it can be pushed according to what the descriptor of the character is calling for, and, you know, in line with the client and what I think they're wanting. So definitely just due to the amount of that work that I've done professionally and the overlap with the shape play that constitutes a lot of my personal work. Yeah, I like seeing what's out there to be discovered in terms of designing, playing around with shapes, playing around with options, and continuing to like recycle ideas and seeing, you know, what the blank page can offer. But I think what Teben was asking is like, when do I know that process is finished? In a professional context, I think that definitely just becomes clear in line with like what the budget allows for and what the timeline allows for. And I just like do my best to space out that level of exploration between how broad the client wants me to go versus what ideas they end up wanting me to like hone in on and really get into the weeds about. And then, yeah, personally, it's just to the affect of like, when am I bored or when do I feel like I've achieved what I've wanted to achieve. I think if I'm like sitting down at the page being like, okay, I want to draw, a kid walking anything other than a dog, I'm going to just like start out with whatever shapes are most pleasing to me. And then once I get to the end of that design, I'll probably have decided like if there's this initial idea that I'm fixated on, like I already have this amalgamous form or something that my mind is leaning towards, it'll be like, okay, can I carve that out and can I like lock down what I think that I have in my head? But if there's nothing really there from the start and it's just like, in this case, it's a prompt, right? And there's not really anything in my head, what I would do is like, I'm going to give myself this amount of time. I'm going to give myself this amount of space. Like I'm going to fill up how many sketchbook pages or how many sheets of copy paper. And I'll kind of set these definitive parameters. And then once I'm utilizing that space, again, I get to kind of control the knobs of like, okay, what kind of breadth am I feeling like I should utilize for this space? What are the extremes of this exploration should I try to go to? Should I just explore what's going to be the most surprising thing for a kid to be walking? Or should I be exploring like what's the cutest, what's the creepiest? If I'm going with sharp shapes, should I explore both sharp shapes and soft shapes? Or is there a certain shape, language, or rhythm that is going to be the unifying element, and I'm going to build everything with a certain design language involved? All of those things kind of come into play to inform what that iteration process is going to look like and when I'm like done with it.
How do you know when you're finished? It sounds like you sort of make rules for yourself, like I have these amount of pages to figure this out, because I'm at the end of the day, when you're coming up with ideas, you could just draw infinity billion ideas and never settle down. So like, and so it sounds like it's a lot of like gut checks and like but how do you decide what to go with? Or is it just intuition completely?
I think, as long as you are doing those gut checks and being like perceptive about what you're putting down, I think you can't avoid having opinions about what you're making. Once you make 5 designs, that's kind of like the point of the iterative process, right? Especially professionally, it's like when you put 5 designs down on a page, one of them is going to speak to you. If you put down 30, you're probably going to get overwhelmed and have analysis paralysis. So check in with yourself at the 5 mark and be like, of these, which one is the strongest? Which one is the most interesting?
Yeah.
Was there a design that looked like it was getting there, but I just made some bad decisions, pulled some uninspired lines? And then it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to do 5 more. And each one is going to be like, oh, for this first one, yeah, I'm going to push it off into this other direction, or I'm just going to try and like polish it a bit more, or, one of these designs just didn't feel like it was hitting the mark. So now I'm just going to look for a new idea to supplement it. And I think that like, yeah, in my terms, I'll use time amounts or sketchbook pages or sheets to determine when I'm going to check in with myself if that analysis process doesn't start happening already just during the process.
A follow-up kind of question to that is from Danny Hines, who was on the podcast.
Danny was my caricature design art director on Craig, and what a great guy. What a great artist.
What a great artist. Episode 165 on Creative Block. It's a fan favorite episode. If you're listening to this episode, definitely check out Danny Hines' episode right after Ty's. Danny asks, I'd love to hear Ty talk about appeal, rhythm, flow, etc. in design. I'm curious about his aesthetic preferences in general.
Oh, jeez.
Well, we're getting
loaded.
Real into the workshop talk right now.
Yeah.
We're in it.
Yeah. Where to start? What was the first part of the question again?
They want to hear you talk about appeal, rhythm, and flow in design. and then what you like,
Okay.
your aesthetics in general.
So, yeah, with appeal, I think rhythm itself kind of like answers that. I've been quite focused on rhythm in my designs recently. I think that there's like certain types of like design stepping stones that we have as artists, and it's like uh, I feel like the level one is like straights versus curves, and then you have like your big, medium, small. There's just these very like, catchy, iconic types of like things that you can keep in mind to like check your designs. But I think that they're like important, but I feel like just saying like what about straights versus curves? What about big, medium, small? What does that really mean, and what does that look like in a design, and how do you organize that in the iterative process? I feel like organization is quite important, so that you can keep track of like I don't know, it's the way that you keep track of like what's working and what isn't, and so that you don't just kind of get lost in a void of like, okay, this looks good, but I don't really understand why. And personally, I found that like rhythm seems to be the answer for that. It's come a little bit just from like my natural design tendencies, or my natural like sketching tendencies, where you're already kind of in the iteration process itself, you're just like repeating something. And when you have 10 of something on a page, it looks a lot better than having just one on a page, because that sense of repetition gives you a bit of a sense of security, right? Where there's this expectation, this anticipation. And so kind of building designs around this principle of like having these elements of consistency so that the viewer knows what to expect makes the design feel good in their eyes. And then you can use that consistency to build towards these elements of surprise where you break the rhythm, and then that becomes an interesting focal point. Yeah, so I think oh, thank you for writing it out.
I'm like writing it out because I'm like, I think this is very cool, and also there are a lot of parallels that I'm drawing with storytelling. When you say consistency feels good, and then you kind of want to have enough of that to build to an element of surprise, I feel that's kind of how you kind of try to work with comedy, or you want to set up
Rule of
things
threes or something, you know?
yeah, in a way where
Totally.
it's like, okay, you set up an expectation. We're all on the same page here. We feel
Right.
good, and then bam, you can have the element of surprise, which is what provokes the laughter. And then
Yeah.
but it's funny that you bring that into design, because I had never really thought about it that way, you know? I always just thought about like what's a good looking drawing, you know?
Totally.
Because then if you're repeating things and then all of a sudden you don't repeat that thing, then you've subverted that. You've subverted that, and it's a surprise. All of a sudden, there's a part of your drawing that pops out as different, and you can focus attention there too. I feel like.
Totally. I liked what you said about threes, Sean, because here's the other thing with rhythm too. I feel like as a creative, I've been a little bit more I wouldn't say open-minded. I would say just more like curious, and perhaps a bit obsessed with drawing these parallels, right, between different crafts and different mediums. And it's hard for me not to think about music when I think about rhythm. And music is such a fascinating craft, because it's like it's so beautiful, and it's so appealing, and it's so built out of like math and numbers and like just pure accuracy, right?
You know who? Okay, the way you're talking is so interesting, because it reminds me of the interview we had with Joe Sparrow. I'm just gonna try to find that episode really fast. Joe Sparrow episode 49.
Hell yeah!
So
check it out.
Check it out, because we talk about a very niche, specific book that draws a parallel between mathematics, art, and music. And it's just reminded me how Ty, you're kind of trying to see all of the parallels between different crafts, and they're kind of talking about like that rhythm and that sense of like how perfection or like how tight it can be. So I just thought it was really cool that you're also thinking about that. You're thinking about how
Yeah.
can you, draw all the parallels between the crafts.
Totally. And yeah, so it's become very interesting to me, right, with art, visual design specifically. Like, okay, in music, you have these beats. It's like, you have these four bars to represent this span of consistency. And like, why can't I have that for my own designs? Why can't I have that when I'm drawing? Is there like this? I've started to think things more in unit systems and measurements a bit, where I can like decide like, okay, with my big, medium, and small, if I draw something, if I draw a square and I draw like a bigger square, what's going to be the effect of like something being a square that's like half as tall, or twice the size, or like four times the size? We know that there needs to be a big thing and there needs to be a small thing, but like, what is that effective exaggeration really going to have on the piece? And if I can more line it up to that type of measurement, is that appeal really going to read more? And it's created some pretty interesting discoveries. And while it doesn't always need to be designed down to the T like that, having that type of rubric and structure to reference, to know that my rhythms are working and to know that my shapes are playing off of each other and building in efficient ways has been so crucial to me organizing my design sense more these days.
I really like connecting it to music because it, like, I feel like it's similar to if you have a song and the tempo raises gradually versus all of a sudden going double time in the tempo. Those are two very different things, and to me that is similar to the square size thing. And I feel like when we start out, we don't know that we need to follow, 4 beats in a measure or whatever with music, and we just play whatever. And then we learn that there's these constraints that are satisfying with music. And I feel like we're doing the same thing with art too. Or you can, where you're realizing that there's repetitions, whether it's like reusing colors multiple times in the drawing, like finding motifs and constraining yourself in the same ways that like playing within 4 beats of a measure is a constraint. I feel like a lot of finding your own style and something satisfying to you and expressive to you is putting these funny little constraints on yourself to make everything very deliberate.
I completely agree. I think constraints are crucial, and I think that like the more that you can feel comfortable or excited or have fun playing around with constraints in your personal work, especially for younger designers, I think that's going to translate very well to their professional skill set as well.
I've never seen someone have so much fun just drawing shapes. It's actually kind of inspiring. Like I know that like people doodle and like maybe they'll draw like squiggles when they're in a meeting or something, but like I can tell that you really actually just like shapes, like just shapes. Do you have a favorite kind of form or shape? Like if you had to choose what your favorite one is?
Yeah, this gummy guy. These lumps, just lumps, are maybe the most satisfying shape to draw, because when you're in one negative space, they're sharp. Like,
that's fun. Yeah.
But on the other side, they're like soft and round and gummy. And playing around with this dichotomy between the two has just been a recent fascination.
That's really cool.
That is so cool.
So you'll look and see through like a lot of designs that I've done within like the past year or so. Specifically, I've become so fixated on mouths because designing teeth and like gums and
It has
lips and
that.
like
It has
the
that same
Yeah.
lump.
more
Yep.
internal like visceral stuff, it suits it so well, and it's very exciting to play around with.
That is so funny. And that makes so much sense. And Nettle Snakes on Instagram asks, "Hello, Ty. I really want to know about your process when approaching feelings and vibes. How do you compose an image that evokes a state of mind, and where do you draw imagery from it? From choosing the character to color to the supporting and abstract design elements."
Ooh. Well, shout out Natalie. She's a real one of my first LA/San Diego art friends. But yeah, that's a heavy question. I think it's truly a matter of honesty, and I don't say that with like, well, I say it with a heavy heart, I guess, because I think it's what I'm still like figuring out with my art, where like I don't have, if I'm playing around with shapes, that's one thing, and I'm going to enjoy having fun. But like when I want to make art and make a statement, I do want it to be fueled by feelings and things that are really real. And I think that like art is the healthiest and best outlet for those, because that's, you know, you get to make something beautiful out of something confusing or overwhelming. But it does take a lot of, you really have to trust yourself to just be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and in order to honor those feelings, I should try and design. I don't even like the word design in this context. I just want to try and open the valve on what I'm feeling with as little of a filter as possible, so that I can just let these feelings exist as they are. Because I think if you're just like, I don't know, if you're happy and you feel forced to express that by drawing a sunshine, I don't think that that's respectful to your happiness. And you know, if you're sad, like there's so many, half the side of like, you know, designing and visual communication is like, yes, we have these visual shorthands and these symbols and things that like we think are the most effective ways to communicate certain sentiments, but I'm just not a believer of that. I always feel like there's something more to explore, and I feel like communication is just always going to be changing, and I want to be there at the forefront of it, at least with art, to find new shapes and new imagery to communicate nebulous things that I don't think can be communicated otherwise, not through words or not through any other art form. And that just takes like some trust and some bravery to really sit with your feelings and just explore what those feelings can look like in the least judgmental way possible.
That's beautiful. I love the way you describe that. I'm going to follow up with another question, but Jason M. Dwyer is asking, previous guest on the pod, by the way, any advice for young designers before they start their first job?
I think that is honestly such an awesome question to segue off of those previous sentiments, because there's something to be said about, and I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, where I feel like there's this polarity between being an artist and a designer. I treat those things as like very opposite ends of a spectrum. Mm-hmm. I think that there's like this very broad, murky gray area between them, but I think it's taken me quite some time to realize like a lot of people start out as artists, right? We're young, we have this abundance of creativity and imagination. We have the way that we see the world, and we just want to express that, and we just want to share that with people, and that's really beautiful. And we see these visuals that other people are making. You know, we're being inspired by these TV shows and movies that we watched when we're young, and we're like, oh dang, like I want to make people feel that way. Like I see the world in such a neat way too, and like I love drawing, like I want to do this, not realizing that process is not art, even though it leaves us with these beautiful feelings. Like entertainment arts, as we call them, is just like entertainment design, where there's like a client, there's like a a test group of like, oh, we want to hit this market and this audience, and this is the idea, and we're gonna like figure out how to sell this concept, and we are going to use your skills as craftsmen and as storytellers and as people capable of making beautiful visuals to sell these ideas. And it's like, I love it. I love being a designer. I think that designing can even be treated in the way where like a piece that you make is a design for yourself, where you're treating yourself as the client and you're meeting your own needs and you're like kind of selling yourself on your own ideas. Whereas art is so much of just like, oh, I just have this inside of me and I'm going to go through the act of letting this out into the world and let it take form. It doesn't matter who sees it, but the be all end all is that it started with me and that I let it out and it exists now. And I think that it's quite challenging to make that transition between like art is something that it's about me and design is something where it's just not about me. I'm a tool in a toolkit, and chances are you're going to be an amazing tool. You're a one of one tool. Nobody can do things quite the same way that you can, and that's why our field is so amazing and so neat. But it is something different entirely than I think what a lot of people imagine it to be when they're young. And it's crazy because I started Craig so late in my art journey, but I still remember the first 2 weeks being so tricky because I was like, okay, I'm finally designing something where I know it's going to make it to the TV screen. Like this project isn't going to die. It's already alive and well. I know that whatever I do is going to like make it to an audience. And I put so much pressure on myself, right? To be like, okay, I'm going to like completely crush this assignment and I'm going to be so proud of it. I remember, like the first thing that I was doing was designing like a baseball outfit. And I was just getting so hung up on these like baseball cleats where I love drawing shoes. And I was like, oh, I can like make these so cool. And I was like trying to flex and try to do something really neat. And I just remember in the design meeting, like the leads or the showrunners were like, oh yeah, like these are really cool, but like this is way too much for TV. Like all these, like this detail or this like flourish, like this doesn't matter, like let's just tone it back a little bit. And I was like, dang. And like of course in like the next meeting I like tone it back, and I know that I'm capable of nailing the shapes and the form and the inking style and all of that, but it took me time to realize like, of course there's going to be opportunities where there's room for you to share your opinions and your insights and your preferences. And I think on Craig specifically, like we had a lot of ability to do that. It's hard to compare to other shows when I just don't have enough experience, but it did feel like that there quite a bit. But overall, you're not being hired for your creative preferences. You're hired for your skill set and whether or not you can deliver on somebody else's vision, on somebody else's ideas, especially as a designer, and with Craig specifically, because the storyboard artists on that show are phenomenal. It's a matter of taking these amazing boards and just polishing and constructing them in the best way possible. And it's a very delicate process of handling all of the effort and care that's come before you and making sure that that translates to the screen as much as it can. And that doesn't leave a lot of like original intent and input and yourself in the design, which is totally fine because it's a job. But I think that it can be quite deceptive for young artists who are not fully aware of what the demands of the industry can be sometimes, to be like, oh yeah, like I can't wait to like put my OC on screen or something like that, or sneak it in there somewhere. And you're just like, nah, you just gotta cross items off your design list and draw things from the board and just make sure that they look tight and that you do the turns and that you show the angles and that the forms are solid. And that's the day,
Especially when I see these kind of like memes on Twitter or like Instagram of people like doing like a redesign of a show, which I think can be like a great exercise, but that will never be the job of a designer.
Totally.
So yeah. So
Unless you're working on the reboot. Unless
yeah,
you're
maybe.
working on the reboot and you got to design them in the new style. But yeah, for the most part, you're right.
Yeah.
In this world of reboots.
Again, that was the joy of working on Craig, though, was like we got to, it was a very wild process for me to like hop on at the end of season 4 when this show was like already so put together and figured out, and then we like made a movie that was supposed to be a prequel to everything, and then I was like having the opportunity to do previs for like,
That's
oh,
crazy.
what are things supposed to look like at the very start? What are some of these like initial interactions and characters? How is that going to take form on screen, and what is that final look going to feel like?
So can we rewind back just slightly? I want to talk about just for a second what it was like to land this job, to like because we didn't really cover how you got this job. Like you went from working non-union jobs. We know that you've been in planes, at zoos, at like all sorts of different jobs all around the place. What were the events leading up to that job, and what was it like when you first started?
Sure. Well, yeah, I made the hard switch from San Diego to LA in 2020, like literally mid-pandemic in the summer. I had just hit a point where I could just feel that my creative reach in San Diego had run a bit dry, at least in terms of like gigs. I have a lot of amazing artist friends down there, but in terms of what I could sustain myself, I was finding myself just like too locked down by like the day jobs and the side gigs that I had to pick up in order to stabilize myself. And I was like, San Diego is so expensive that if I stay here, I'm just I'm going to get stuck, and I'm going to just like reach a dark place where I don't feel like I can ever fully make that transition. And so I moved up to LA with the clear intent to like really make things happen within animation. And it unfortunately was just like another year or two of struggling to just figure out life stuff and get acclimated. Because what was crazy is that prior to the pandemic, right, there was this opportunity throughout the past like couple of years where basically every month, if not every couple of weeks, on the weekend or on a free day, I would just drive up to LA. I would hit up somebody on Instagram, a mutual, somebody who is in the industry or somebody that I had met at one of these events like CTN or Lightbox, and be like, yo, do you want to go sketch at a cafe? Do you want to go hang out? And I had this reach and this access to people in the industry, and I was beginning to like build these friendships and connections. And it always just felt like, oh, if I was just like here a little bit more present and had more opportunity to go to a few more events or be just a little bit more involved in these people's lives, that like an opportunity would present itself. Because the industry that I've known, unfortunately and unfortunately, has always just been like a who you know and what they have to offer you. And while that has resulted in me like getting to work with my friends on an amazing project, I can recognize it for being that, and that is how it continues to kind of exist in my perception.
Friendship is a powerful thing. I mean, like I do think it's funny that like who you know is always used as like a sharp kind of scathing, like, oh, it's about who you know, but also it's like it's about like your friendships help get you jobs. I mean, your friend, it's about friendships and and learning who you can trust and stuff like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, you know, making cartoons is making cartoons, but at least the way that a lot of productions tend to run, it's very stressful and it's very demanding. And it's nice to have like very pleasant, very close people around you who have your back and are not going to get frustrated and are like going to continue fighting for like peace and productivity and making sure that like the best artwork possible reaches the TV screen. But yeah, when it came to me moving up mid-pandemic, that social access to people was not great, because people were just trying to survive, and the culture of meeting up and hanging out and being in person was just not
it's a rough time to come here.
Yeah.
Not an ideal time for that. But yeah, of course, lo and behold, as COVID started to reel and people started to make their way out of their houses again and meetups started happening, it was like it was pretty soon after that things lined up with Craig.
Nice. And was it through like a friend that like recommended you?
Yeah, so AJ, who I had mentioned before, AJ Howard, he's like we started out as just like mutuals through Instagram, huge supporters of each other's work. He had also like moved down from the Bay Area a little bit after I had come to LA, with his own goal of like, yeah, I really want to try to make this animation thing happen. And yeah, he had got hit up for some freelance with them first, and then that freelance turned into full-time work on the design team. And then when Nick Wynn, who was on the design team, he kind of graduated and went over to doing lead designs on Jessica, the sister spin-off show that left an opening on the design team. And at that point, I had like met Deshawn and Naja, who are both amazing board artists / directors for both Jessica and Craig, respectively. And yeah, they were like, oh yeah, like you should be a part of this. And so I also started out at that point. I was doing actually Viz Dev first, freelance for the movie, exploring what some of the pirate kids could look like and what young Craig and Kelsey and JP could look like. And then after I'd finished that like Viz Dev freelance, they were like, oh yeah, like we need to wrap up some designs on the Heart of the Forest arc for season 4. And then yeah, so I got to design for a bit on the season, doing character designs and props and FX. And then yeah, we did all of the designs for the movie, and then came back for a final stint of doing what portion of season 5 Warder left us with before decimating the rest of our episode list.
We do have a question from Creaturenoid on Newgrounds. Has there ever been a prop or effect that give you any particular struggle or frustration?
That's fascinating. You know, if anything was terrible, it's locked away in the Mind Palace now, no longer for me to confront.
Rose-tinted glasses. Yeah, you're just like, everything is awesome.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if there was anything. Yeah, I think it really was just like that first week or so of actually designing on the show.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was just like holding myself to some unreasonably high standard.
Just proving yourself, and
yeah, just making problems for myself. But I think once I figured out like what was expected of me and what I was capable of, it became a lot easier. It's interesting because I feel like all of the really like demanding assignments were the ones that I like had fun with, and then like the ones that like were frustrating or like not frustrating because they were hard.
It's just kind of boring. Yeah,
they're boring, and like at a certain point, especially with the movie, we had like just about like 6 different directors.
Wow.
In terms of like people, head storyboard, leading storyboard, leading design, the showrunners. And because that movie was so demanding, like not everybody could be present for every design meeting, and there would just be times where like communication would get dropped and you would change. You would edit a design in accordance to one notes and resubmit it, and then you would get different notes the next meeting. And then finally, once everybody's on the same page, it gets approved, and it's just like, no, okay. But like those frustrations were not like, oh no, how is this ever going to get finished or done? It's just like, I know that this will get pushed through when it finally needs to get pushed through.
Yeah, that's like something that can be easily lost also on people who kind of like start out in animation. Is like communication is so key, and sometimes it's completely out of your control. Sometimes it's like, you can't get all the people in the same room to look at it together and come up with a solution together. Sometimes you're gonna just have to do notes and go back and forth between all the different opinions until, like, yeah, like you said, they can look at it and be like, oh, okay, that's what we need actually.
It sounds like communication is the biggest struggle overall, whether it's the anthology, whether it's
Yeah.
working on a show. Just like I feel like the thing the most people have a hard time with is communication. So if you were to give kind of newer people in the industry advice on communicating in a job setting, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think, again, in line with design, it kind of comes down to you being able to put yourself in check a bit more and understand like what is needed from you and how you can. Communication is a two-way street, and that requires making sure that you're understood and that you're heard, but also that you're hearing what the other person is saying as well. And I think that like as an artist, it's hard because we can get very obsessed with how we see things and how we understand things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think myself specifically, I can find myself just like falling off the grid and getting so lost in my own thoughts and getting so like, concerned or fixated or obsessed with like, oh, like with my artwork, like, oh, can I like communicate this? Is this coming across properly? And I think that like, while it is always going to be like this important personal goal to like find new ways to say things that are unique, and we can feel like, oh yeah, like we solved something or we brought something to the world that nobody else can. Sometimes you just like gotta be a normal guy. You just gotta like make sense and speak clearly and like just be on the level with where everybody else is at, because that will just save you a lot of fuss.
That is very, that is
carving
yeah.
carving be a normal guy into my arm. Yeah.
This is so real though. No, I think like this is so understated, and we might not have actually addressed that on the podcast a lot, but I do think this is very real on so many levels. First of all, like you said, Ty, there's we can't lie. We've all wanted to change the face of animation or the art world at some point in our crazy
Totally.
little artist mind. We've all thought we had something. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that drawing for so long, being so invested in art for so long, it might be hard sometimes to be clear in the way you share, like someone shares ideas, right, as an artist. So being a normal guy, I can also understand in that way, where it's like it can be easy to get lost in like very high concept ideas or high concept like topics, and sometimes it's just like, well, we need to design a shoe. It's just a like regular shoe. It doesn't just a sneaker. It doesn't have to be like high.
Please don't
fashion.
impress us with the
shoe. Precisely. And I think that it's like, I don't know. I can only be so normal, right? And I have to accept that and work within my own limits. But that's why, again, it's kind of been like, okay, how can I give myself the right outlets to fulfill all of the different forms of my existence? If I want to communicate or find people to connect with or communicate with in a new way, how can I afford that to myself so that I can show up in a workspace and not feel like remiss that like it's not speaking to everything that I am as a human being or everything that I am as an artist?
I think Yeah,
Oh,
this
please.
advice is just like so instrumental. It's so important. I do feel like that is something like for me as an artist working in the industry for way too long, I went without that side project that would keep me sane during my like day-to-day job, like you said, like trying to fulfill like the higher artistic needs within the day job, which is not always compatible.
Totally.
Yeah. What's your so I know you did fetch and let's kind of jump to this question from Jason because he asks Jason M. Dwyer says, I know you have a passion for board game design. What board
Mm.
games interest you most, and what does the early step of a project like that look like? Have you learned any lessons from that process that feeds into your art or made any cross-disciplinary connections? Art making and board game design.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I guess that's its own thing to unpack. I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but it was, yeah, it's quite an ironic realization, right? To like come up here to LA and be chasing animation and like throughout my whole life, right? It's like animation, gotta work at like Cartoon Network, and like all the while, I don't think I was ready to like I don't know how it happened or why, but I just wasn't really ready to admit how important games were to me. And I think it was like specifically once I came up here to LA, and especially through the pandemic when things were quite isolated. And then, like, ironically, when I had like friend groups that like had game nights and played board games and card games, and they like weren't associated with the animation industry, and then within like the realm of like my art friends, I just couldn't get people together to play games anymore. I
Mm.
was looking back at my time in San Diego and I was like, literally every week, if not every 2 weeks, there was enough friends of my friend group that were like creatively inclined that just got together to play board games and card games. And I got so much fulfillment out of getting to connect with people that way. And it was like a part of my life that was starting to become completely absent. And I did not know what to do about it, which is why I tried to get Evan to make a card game with me. And we're now making a card game.
Hey, awesome. That's so
Mm,
sick.
Because,
yeah.
yeah, I kind of realized, I think part of Jason's question is like the correlation between the art making process and like games. And I think I've realized more recently like how much of art and creating things and putting things out in the world is not so much about the perfect design or the perfect idea, nor
Mhm.
is it about getting famous, nor is it about like changing people's lives or getting to connect with as many people as possible. But it is about connection. I want
Mhm.
to I want to connect with people through my craft. I want to use my art to get to communicate myself better, to get
Mhm.
to understand other people better, and to like make it so that I can show up in people's lives in more meaningful ways, at least for the people that are around me. And when it came to the idea of like games, is like, oh yeah, like I don't want to make a TV show pitch. I want to think up a fun, silly game idea and get this game printed so that I can call up my friends and be like, yo, do you want to come over and play this thing together? And we can laugh and joke and have a good time and get to interface with each other in a way that we don't get to on the day to day, because that seems like a dream reality to me, not being able to like point to something that I made on the TV and be like, oh yeah, like look how cool that is. I mean, I still want to be working in TV, and especially after having worked on Craig and getting to hear
Mhm.
some stories about like kids really resonating with that show, and especially some of the work that I've contributed to, that definitely has its magic, but that magic exists not as tangibly because I'm not a father and I don't have younger siblings.
Mhm.
The young cousins in my life aren't as close to me locally as I wish that they were. And I just don't know a lot of young kids, so I don't get to see that magic firsthand. And maybe it's selfish, but I want to like see the effects firsthand of what I can do for people And I know that I can like make shit that people will have a good time with. So why would I not like respect that capability and try to lean into that a bit more?
I think that's so beautiful. I love the way that you're
Mhm.
kind of thinking about the interaction, you know, like what your work can provide in terms of like connection and interaction between people rather than your personal artistic self-fulfillment. It's really cool. We had so many questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to ask one question from Lumber Jackson. Are there any past concepts you return to and draw inspiration from?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like personally, I guess you could call it like a, I guess I don't know what I would call it. There's different types of work that I will gravitate towards at different points in my life, depending on what my needs are and where my interests are. I always have like a, you know, even though I joke about like, oh, I don't want to make like a TV pitch or anything. I don't want to make anything too grandesque. I want to do stuff that's like, you know, actionable and has immediate impact on people's lives. Like, even though I say all that, that's not to say that I don't have my grandesque ideas. There's of course like the big shows or the big video games or the you know, the really big ideas that I just enjoy world building for when I get the chance to do that, you know, when I really want to play around in that way or flex those muscles or experiment with new storytelling techniques. And I approach that type of subject matter, you know, not without any timeline, without any expectation of like, oh, this is how it needs to connect with people. This is what its final form is going to look like. It's truly just like a playground of like, here's just like a big old fun idea to sink your teeth into and let yourself be whatever type of designer you want to be in this context. So I'll have that to come back to whenever I need to. But in terms of like conceptually, if I'm just like, oh, I like gotta warm up for the day and I don't know what I want to draw, I find myself leaning quite well. I spoke on like the viscera elements previously, like mouths
Mm-hmm.
and internal workings and stuff like that. But I also find myself drawing like a lot of like fish and birds. I'll either go very aquatic or very like yeah, very feathery, I guess. Because there's just a lot. Birds are such weird creatures, and fish are such weird creatures that I think there's so many jumping off points to be like, I know how to make you even weirder. And your mind is just ready to accept that, like, oh yeah, that's still a fish though.
Yeah, they're almost more like shape based than anatomy based.
Truly, truly. But yeah, all of that comes down to like having a conversation with myself. I think I need to like, I'm somebody who's like always checking in and asking like what cups are being filled, what cups aren't being filled, and making sure that I'm like servicing both the designer in me and the artist in me, and doing like that right mix of like, am I playing enough? Am I having enough fun? Am I, you know, studying enough? Am I practicing enough? And like kind of treating those like tangible gauges that I'm trying to keep filled to a certain extent.
So smart. It's so smart, and it's also something that deeply resonates. I think in this industry, with like doing an art job, it's so easy to forget to have fun and to forget to love what we do.
Totally.
Now it's when we're doing what we love to do, it can be frustrating to be met with roadblocks or creative blocks. And I was curious, do you experience creative block, and what do you do to work through it?
You know, I would have said that I had like quite a good handle on creative block until this particular evening, where again I'm like trying to sketch digitally, and I just have realized how long it's been since I've had to play around with this medium in this way. But a lot of it comes down to relinquishing expectations, which is probably where I'm like getting hung up on right now, right? It's like, oh, I like want to draw these prompts. I want to feel like they can meet the design sensibilities of what they would be like if I was like, you know, had a ballpoint pen or an ink liner and was going at it in my sketchbook. But the truth of the matter is that I'm like, you know, I'm not fully familiar with how this pen is stabilized or how these lines are going to pull. And oftentimes when I'm like approaching a new medium, or if I'm just in a general art block where I don't feel like I'm enjoying what I'm drawing, I try to like break it down to the most simplest that I can. And I mean that to say, like, a lot of my warm-ups are just like, can I just pull a line that I think looks nice and looks beautiful and that I can just take joy in? Because I think that if you can just pull lines that you're happy with, it doesn't matter what you're making with them, right? It's gonna look awesome because it's made up of all of the lines that you think are neat and that are you. But I think so often we have these ideas that we're enslaved to and we want them to look cool, but we're not really doing the due diligence to respect just like taking that shortcut of like we don't always give ourselves the space to play or to discover new good shapes or fun cheats or techniques or shorthands that might service our ideas well. We just have this pressure to execute on this stroke of inspiration or this good idea as quickly as possible. And that's just like a lot of pressure, and you like have to build up to that pressure. And when that pressure is too much, you're responsible for relieving it. And like at the end of the day, people always say it, and I tend to get mad at them for saying it, but I do believe it to be true that like art is about having fun. And even though there's like, you know, an important way to go about it and a certain type of responsibility that comes with like being able to draw whatever you want, I think at the end of the day, like it is, if you're not someone in it for the thrill of just like how it feels to drag a pen or a stylus or a pencil across a piece of paper and just enjoy the mark that it's making and what it can build into and what can become of it, I think that that's worth finding and taking some time to explore why you might not feel that way if you're in a state where you're just like upset with everything that you're creating or you don't feel like you can create. And if you're in a spot where you realize that you just can't have fun pulling lines, then I think that at least that communicates like that you need to step away, that you need to refill your cup in some other regard, or just that there's like too many external pressures in your life right now that like are keeping you from being that present and able to just play around and meet yourself where you're at, wherever your skill set is at, and just be like, you know, I know that I can explore what my hand and what my mind is capable of, and I'm going to permit myself to do so without critique or judgment until I feel comfortable again, until I feel excited again, until I feel capable. And that's not easier said than done, but still worth being said, right?
Yeah.
Shout out to one line. Shout out to pulling one line. I've never heard it referred to as pulling a line, but it makes it feel like something outside of drawing, like you're pulling a line out of you, like it makes it feel very actiony, yeah. Rather than just drawing. That's a cool way of expressing that.
Yeah, but I think that's all I'm not that wise. That's all I have to say on the matter.
No, I mean that's great. That's great. Valid answer.
Yeah, it's a basic answer, I think, with a lot of depth as well. And well, is there anything that you want to plug before we wrap up?
I mean, I don't even know when this episode's going to be airing. It's weird to like think about like Lightboxes coming up, but I know that probably by the time this comes out, we're both going to be on the other side of it and living in different realities. So, but if you're listening to this, I hope I saw you at Lightbox. You know, come see me at table 428, I think. or that's where I would have been. I don't know where you're going to be, V.
I'm 505, so we're
oh.
going to be not that far.
Okay. Well, if you're listening to this and you were at Lightbox and you were in those areas and you didn't see us, then, I'm glad that you're here now. And if we don't sell out of Fetch, our first Good and Able anthology, will be reopening our shop afterwards to be selling copies for anybody that wants to purchase the rest of them. Woo. And I will probably need some time to recoup from Lightbox and Fetch and handling the freelance that I've been grateful enough to have this past month. But you can definitely look forward to what Good and Able is going to be doing next. Our card game, which is yet to be name dropped, you can definitely expect that early 2025 and more details to come.
Where will you be announcing that primarily?
That will likely be on Instagram at good GOOD_N_Abel, ABEL, and then of course my own personal Instagram at TY GOODWIN.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Ty. That was so fun, and this is the end of this creative block. Ty, thanks for being our guest and sharing your story.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun. I wish I could have made more sketches. But I enjoyed chatting.
You drew plenty.
You drew a lot.
And you also talked a lot. And also, thanks to our listeners, follow us on social media at CRTV Block, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, Marco for helping us produce the show, and Abuka for creating the short clips that we've been putting online.
If you love our show, you can support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews and access to our Discord community. Another great way that you can support us is by commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing, all these great things on all our platforms. Click the link in the description of this episode to follow Ty and Good and Able and to get the link to our Patreon. I've been your host, V.
And I was Sean. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week.
Bye!